Hello and welcome to this introductory tutorial about Leadwerks Editor. In this lesson we're going to go over the main layout of the editor and talk about some of the major features, and then we're going to talk about the three main kinds of geometry that you'll use while building levels for Leadwerks. So when I open the introduction map in Leadwerks Editor, this is what we see. We've got this truck sitting here on this nice block of concrete. On the top you'll notice we have a standard menu and toolbar with lots of cool features in it. On the left we have these big buttons, and these are just common tasks that you'll usually use. This is selection mode between, you can choose to select objects or faces of objects. And if you had a terrain in the scene, then you'd also be able to go into terrain editing mode. And the rest of these buttons are just different kinds of objects that you can create in the level. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. On the right is where most of our features are packed away in this side panel. The Objects tab has a bunch of categories of objects we can choose from. And in each one we have several different objects to choose. And these are just different things we can create. If we look at the Assets tab, this shows every file in our project. So each of these files, textures, materials, models, prefabs, sounds, scripts, shaders, all this stuff has a little window that will pop up when you double click on it, and then we can go in and adjust all of its settings really finely. So there's tons of cool stuff to explore in there, but let's move on to the Scene tab. This shows every object in the scene, and we can tell what's selected because the selected objects correspond to what's selected in this scene tree. And also you'll notice when I selected that truck, this Properties section appeared, and this allows us to modify all the properties of this individual object, or we can modify all these properties simultaneously of all the selected objects. And then finally we have the Terrain tab. And we're not going to talk about terrain in this lesson, but this would be where you would start if you were creating a terrain. So now let's talk about the three main kinds of objects that you'll use when creating levels in the Leadwerks editor. The first kind of object we're going to talk about is brushes. Now brushes are these big blocks that we can click and drag. We can rescale them, we can rotate them, and we can use this to make all our walls and floors and major features of our editor. And it's not just boxes, we can create cylinders, wedges, all kinds of objects. Now these are useful because, as you can see, we're sketching them out right here in the editor. When we rescale these things, their UV coordinates get remapped. So in other words, when we stretch the object out, the texture doesn't get stretched out on the surface, it just automatically gets adjusted. And we can actually adjust the properties of this more finely. If we go back to if we select the face and then go back to the Objects tab, then all these settings open up, and we can use this to scale and offset and rotate the way that the texture lies across the surface of the object. So if you're like me and you're not that great at using a lot of modeling tools like 3D Studio Max, then this is fantastic because it just allows you to sketch out the walls and floors and major features of your level, and then you can go back and use model geometry to populate the level and kind of flesh it out. Even if you are a good artist and you're good at using modeling programs, this is still useful because, as you can see, we're doing this right here in the editor. We can see the lighting immediately as we edit things, and we can launch into the game and come back without any trouble at all. So it's just really good for playtesting and prototyping, as well as setting up the flow and main design of the level. This is actually how we did our our more advanced levels, they all started as CSG brushes like this. So that's brushes, and they're sort of the main building block of your scene. And then we'll talk about models, like this truck. So models are loaded from files, and we're not changing the vertices or anything in the editor, but we can still rotate and scale and change these quite a bit. Models are useful because we can place them in the scene and they'll always be loaded from files. So if we want to add some more details to this truck, or we want to change the way it looks a little bit, we can modify that original file, and the next time the map is loaded, the model will be reloaded. It'll actually work instantaneously. If we were to save this model from another program like 3D Studio Max or Blender, if we saved that file, the editor would actually detect the change, and reload it right now. So that's why models are useful. Models are used for the details of your scene. When you have repeating objects that occur more than once, then you would want to use a model for that so that you don't have to go back and create the same thing over and over. And then finally, the last kind of object we'll talk about are point entities, and we have two point entities in this scene. This one is a camera, and we can see the outline of it appears when we select the object, and this is a directional light, and that's what's actually casting the shadow here. Now if we go to the Scene tab and we look down at the properties, we've got a few properties that appear with this directional light. Now I'm going to delete this light because directional lights aren't actually that interesting, and I'm going to get a nice spotlight here. And I'll just press enter to create that. And now I want to rotate this around a little bit, so I'm just going to go to the Rotate X button. There we go. And now it's shining down on our truck. So let's look at a couple of the properties of the spotlight here. We can adjust the range, and this will make the spotlight have a further range, or it'll be shorter. And this controls how intense the light is at any given point. It's really easy because you can see the outline of the light volume right here. And then there's the spot angles, and this controls the cone here. We can set the inner and the outer angle, and if we have them close together, then we get a really sharp spotlight here on the edges. You can see the border here. And if we make this, now let's make the interior angle smaller, and you can see that that change is sort of stretched out over more space, so it's harder to tell where the transition between light and dark is. So with those three main types of geometry, you can create just about everything you need with level in the Leadwerks editor. And the only other thing that's kind of object we haven't talked about is terrain, which will be in another lesson. This concludes this tutorial. Thanks for watching.